This is the Bitcoin Consciousness podcast, and today I have the incredible Tomer Strolight. Welcome, Tomer.
What are you doing introducing me as incredible? You're fueling my ego, which is exactly what I need you to not do here on the network. I know you're doing it to me. You're going to push me over the edge. Good morning or afternoon for you. See, here I am being an egoist again, assuming that my time zone. How dare I project my time zone on you? Presume your time zone. Good day.
Yes. And here comes even more for your ego, because your article, The Legendary Treasure of Satoshi Nakamoto, is the best article I've read this year, at least 2022. So there you go.
Yeah.
More fuel
Well,
for the fire.
Thank you. It is. It's a piece that came to me one morning. I'd been talking with Louis Liu the prior night, who is the person who I credit with taking me over to making something artistic. He's, in a sense, my patron. He reached out to me after I'd written my first article about appreciating Bitcoin art, which was about Fractal and Crypt's artwork, which he bought. And he asked me to write an article about Bitcoin being generational wealth. And I had never before been commissioned to write an article. We didn't talk about pay, although it was clearly implicit that he was prepared to pay for such an article. And ultimately, I ended up writing the article, Bitcoin is Generational Wealth, at his request. He requested it several times, like a true patron. And finally, I was struck with this artistic notion. And when I wrote it, I realized I wanted to make a film out of it. And I asked him if he would put up the money to produce the film. And right away, he said yes, which led to a lot of really nice things, including the creation of the film, Bitcoin is Generational Wealth. And so I'd had this follow-up conversation with him where we both talked about the spiritual experiences we've had in our lives, religion, Bitcoin, all sorts of things. And then the next morning, I went downstairs to my office, or to my wife's office. I guess she's the room that used to be called my office. And I just started writing. And I didn't have any plan or rhyme or reason, but I wanted to get down some of these emotions that were in my mind from this overnight experience of digesting the content of his and mine conversation. And the whole thing came out of me all at once. There was no, like I said, there was no planning, there was no ordering. It just somehow, inspired by previous thoughts I had and previous things I'd written. So I guess I'd had some practice talking about some of these topics. I just sat there and wrote, and I probably lost myself in writing for 3 or 4 hours. And then I came out of the room and I had this piece written. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more about it. But the part of the story that is called The Legendary Treasure of Satoshi Nakamoto, which comes at the very end of it, I had no idea I was going to write any of that. And that's the part that I find most moving, and that lots of other people do as well. They just say, many people tell me this article brought them to tears many times. And I know that's the part that brought me to tears. And I had no idea I was going to write any part of it, let alone the part with the twist at the end of it. I just felt like I was obviously tuned into, I shouldn't say obviously, I feel like I was tuned into a signal, and I was receiving this article, or at least a story of the legendary treasure of Satoshi Nakamoto, from some, at the most gentle, or at least controversial, from some subconscious part of my mind, or subconscious parts of my mind. And it was just being revealed to me, like one sentence at a time. And then when the twist happens in the story, I was like, wow. And I was just crying and typing. And, but whatever it was that I was tuned to there was like a gift. And we can talk more about other aspects of the article, but where this thing came from, I still don't know. Some people will call it flow state. Some people will call it just tuning into a frequency. But what it certainly wasn't, was planned, forced writing, where I sat down and said, I'm going to write an article that's going to be about the legendary treasure of Satoshi Nakamoto. and this is what it's going to be. Like none of that happened. It was somehow that when I finished writing all the list of things that make Bitcoin spiritual for me and for others that I've observed, it was like, you now are given, the universe said, you will now be given the gift of the story of the legendary treasure of Satoshi Nakamoto. And it handed it to me. It was like I telling the story, like now that you've heard all this, you're ready to hear the story. But it was like the universe did the same for me. It's like, now you're ready to hear this. And I heard it in some way that was quite spiritual itself.
Yeah. Yeah, also the last part surprised me. I had this feeling that, okay, it was good. And then, but I thought it was sort of the point, and then it was adding this extra dimension to it in the end. So it was just took it even higher in resonance in my understanding.
Mm-hmm. I think maybe like what I was doing in that first part, like I was peeling away the peel of a banana or an orange, right? It's like, this is why it's spiritual. This is what it shows you about purity. This is what it does about thinking for yourself, and so on and so forth. And then there was it. I peeled it, and there's the fruit. And that's what the legendary treasure Satoshi Nakamoto story is. It's like, now you can enjoy this fruit. Without all these insights, you couldn't enjoy the story in the same way. And it revealed what the significance of Satoshi's treasure is, and what it really is. Right? It's not just fruit. It has a deeper meaning.
Yeah, and I think how you created this is such a good analogy for how we as humans can actually function in a new world, because I tend to call it natural intelligence. And then,
Mm-hmm.
so we have this innate sense of being really good people, but then we
Mm-hmm.
don't really trust that part in us. So we use the mind to sort of control and twist things and plan things and compare things. And that creates the kind of society that we live in now, where we use our
Mm-hmm.
rational mind to navigate in life. And what you
Yeah.
describe here is to create this really, really good article. Then you actually didn't use your mind, but you use your mind maybe afterwards to sort of polish it up. You created some images to go with it to make it even better. And that's sort of the role of the rational mind that I think we should have in everyday life, to be guided by
Mm-hmm.
this higher intelligence, and then just
Mm-hmm.
use the rational mind to sort of polish things and communicate, create some concepts to discuss and things like that. Would you
Yeah.
agree?
Let me add something. Yeah, and I even want to add to it. Like, so when I was done writing the story, I like, my face was covered in tears after this legendary treasure of Satoshi Nakamoto part of it came to me, and I came out of my flow state and into my rational state, and I was like, okay, what do I do with this? And given that it had been a conversation with Lewis that had inspired this, I was like, I guess it's a sign that I need to make another. I started rationalizing. I guess it's a sign that I need to make another movie. And it's a long piece, so people tend not to read long pieces. So that's what I need to do with this. And I went down a rabbit hole of 6 months and got my friends involved, and did a lot of stuff to tried to get people who have experience with film to review it. And I ended up going down what turned out to be a dead end at the time for about 6 months, because I think I wrote this thing back. I can't remember exactly when I wrote it, but I had spent, no, I want to say it was like 6 months. It was probably in March that I wrote it. And then I wanted to like go down to Bitcoin Miami with a trailer for, a teaser trailer for how to turn this thing into a film. And I put a lot of effort. And you remember, you and I had a session where I was invited to Michael Saylor's barbecue, and I wanted to talk to people about it there, and I wanted to build up my confidence. In any event, none of that happened. Right? And what I want to say is, as soon as I handed it over to my rational mind was not in flow state on this. And it was trying to pitch it and peddle it and sell it and re-envision it. And it wasn't happening And part of my psyche was becoming really sad because here I had this beautiful story and I didn't know how to give it to the world. I was also struggling with getting people to even read the story as a story. Right? Like I had it as a Google Doc and I was sharing it with a lot of people. A lot is maybe an overstatement, but I was sharing it with people who I thought might be able to give me good feedback on it for whatever reason. They came from the art world, or they came from the film world, or they were just people I respected, and people just didn't get to the end of it, and the end was the best, the best part. So I was feeling a little bit lost, well, or completely lost even on this thing, and then a flow state thing hit me again at the very end of August, which was again this message that just said, publish it as an article. All right, get this off your chest, if you will. Shrug it off already. It's putting a huge weight on your shoulders, and you're not making progress as a film. You've written stories. Publish it as a story. And so I set aside. It's interesting. I sat aside with my rational mind, some time to edit it. I thought, you know what? I've read it. I've read it at least a dozen times myself. It won't take that long. But it took me 3 days to edit it. And it was just all polished, right? Like the wrong word here, the right word there, a confusing sentence here, repetitive wording over there. Just really give it some polish. And also to put this mid-journey art into it, I had to teach myself a little bit to find enough correct images. And my rational self had already given up on this piece. So when it was finally published, I shared it with one tweet. And usually when I was sharing my articles, I would share them with a tweet. Then a couple of hours later, I might take a great quote and reshare it with a tweet from that, and just do a variety of different things to try to help my story get out there. But I shared it with one tweet that was explanatory. It said something to the effect of, you know, I've recently written a piece that explains why people have these spiritual journeys when starting to explore Bitcoin. And I went away because I thought, okay, I finally got this thing off my chest. And, we'll see what ends up happening with it, but at least it's not a weight on my shoulders anymore. And within a few hours, it had been widely shared. Gigi had shared it. Michael Saylor had shared it. I can't even remember the list of people who had shared it. It's not that important who shared it, although that certainly helped it get reach. And the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. I was starting to get lots and lots of messages from people telling me that it brought them to tears, that it explained to them something that they had experienced but couldn't put their finger on, couldn't put into their own words. What had just been a relief of getting something on my shoulders suddenly turned into this tremendous connection with people, and all of it in love. Like I don't actually think, maybe I put it out of my mind, but I don't think I actually had any negative comments about the article. I may have had some negative comments about Bitcoin, right? Because there's always trolls who have bad things to say about Bitcoiners, but I don't really even remember any of those. It was just all connection, gratitude, love, and all these really positive emotions from people. And so it was unexpected. I kind of expected this to be one of my more esoteric and less read pieces. And within a week, it had become the most read article about Bitcoin that I'd ever read on Medium, as far as I know.
And the funny thing when things like this happen, like you get it as a gift from God, so to speak, and then
Yep.
you struggle a bit and then you release it. And when the topic is also about what we value over money, power, and fame, and how Satoshi walked away from money, power, and fame. And all of a sudden, a gift from God turns into an opportunity for you to be pulled into money, power, and fame. So how has that journey gone?
That's interesting. I guess I have been so enamored by and inspired by Satoshi's story and the story of his creation, Bitcoin, that I've been very careful in my walk to have a very low time preference and a very high goal preference of deliverance. And I think a lot of this has been subconscious to me. And like I was involved in Bitcoin for something like 6 years before I decided to make it my career because I didn't want to draw. This is me psychoanalyzing myself, right? So I don't know exactly all the reasons. I think I was still caught inside the big fiat world and I didn't see a way out of the fiat world. So there was that. And then when I finally decided that I was going to dedicate all my time and energy to Bitcoin, I did it as a leap of faith. I didn't have a job in Bitcoin. I just was like, I said this before. I'll take care of Bitcoin, and Bitcoin will somehow take care of me. That was the leap of faith that I gave it, and that's borne out to be true. So I do think that I have to continue to have faith in that particular process and not start looking around and saying, how do I now pay the bills by doing something in Bitcoin that brings in money? But how do I just keep surrendering to the flow state of what gifts Bitcoin gives me, these gifts, and just go with the flow of them? And God will provide, or Bitcoin will provide somehow through this. Because I really, really like the most valuable moments are not moments where I get some money out of these things. Like being in flow state and experiencing the arrival of a story like the legendary treasure of Satoshi Nakamoto, being there for the moment when it lands on Earth, being the instrument that received that message. Wow, that's I don't know how to describe that in words. It's a very heavenly feeling. It's a very divine experience of creativity, and to be able to experience something like that is better than anything money can buy. As far as my value system is concerned.
It is possible that Satoshi experienced similar, because it's like if you would turn this opportunity to something to gain popularity, gain money, if you would sort of bring it down to a fiat level and exploit it, then you wouldn't have as much access to those flow states and those connection with the universe that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So it's like a path, like which path do I want to do? Do I want to trust in the creation and in my own ability to follow my heart? Or do I want to exploit this and sort of be greedy and try to get as much as possible from it? And it could be possible that Satoshi experienced a similar spiritual awakening, and that's why he was able to have the courage to walk away, because he thought, if I would stay here, I would be dragged down into the fiat system. And I don't want to do that. I want to be true to my path. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I was having this thought as I was saying it, as I was saying my last statement, and I think you've connected to the same thing. I think Satoshi is this inspiration because he also somehow had this, and of course I wasn't there, but I do feel a connection to it, that he somehow had this same type of experience where the solution to the Byzantine general problem came to him, and the ability from what he knew in his life, which obviously included a study of math and cryptography and distributed systems and computer programming to some extent, he was able to put these pieces together to craft a creation that was beautiful on its own and didn't need, in fact, would have been poisoned by being made into a corporation or some other kind of entity that we're all generally familiar with, whether, a government-run NGO or a not-for-profit charity. He could have made Bitcoin into any one of these things, but he kept it pure. It was just what it is, this peer-to-peer computer program that runs, which isn't a corporation or a not-for-profit entity or anything that has any human beings in charge of it. And he couldn't be in charge of it, and he couldn't exploit it, even though he potentially was the only person in the world in a position to exploit it. And so he chose the path of purity, and in so doing, left this structure, Bitcoin itself, an entity of purity and created by a person who walked the path of purity. And I think that's the inspiration that so many of us get, which is what I wrote about in this piece. I took this act of purity and documented it as purely as I could. And I'm really grateful that I didn't at some point betray the purity, the purity of a thing and do something with it that that would have sullied or tainted the purity of the piece. And so I don't know that I'm presented with the opportunity for money and power and fame out of having written this thing, but I I just kind of get a little bit lost, right? And I guess the most important thing is I shouldn't be pursuing the question even, well, how does having written this story now get me money, power, and fame? Because I wrote this story and in the spirit of Satoshi gave it as a gift to everyone. I received it as a gift and I passed on the gift. And I think this is the other big inspiration that I draw from this, and it was an inspiration that came to me in the week after I published this, was like, we should be generous with our Bitcoin. We should give it away, especially to people who don't have the capacity to save. Because you can persuade somebody Bitcoin is a great savings vehicle, but if they're in the fiat world, living paycheck to paycheck, not even that, finding themselves in debt, they don't have the opportunity to buy Bitcoin. They don't have the opportunity to save Bitcoin. And I imagine telling many Bitcoiners I know, find people who can't save and give them $25, $50 worth of Bitcoin. It'll be good for the Bitcoin's network effect. It'll be good for the circulation effect. But I imagined some of them saying back to me, you know what, Tomer, that's not happening. Why should I give away my Bitcoin? I worked hard for my money. Bitcoin allowed me to save my money. Why would I give it away as a gift? And I don't mean to guilt people into it, but I just want to say, because you should follow in Satoshi's footsteps. You have the whole of Bitcoin, capital B Bitcoin, the whole system was a gift. You received it. Satoshi gave you the whole thing as a gift. He gave us all the whole thing as a gift, and set the example to say, be generous, give a gift, don't be petty, don't pursue your own monetary wealth in a trade-off for giving the world a gift, right? And look at how much better off we all are because he made a gift of it. Because if he had not made a gift of it, if he had pre-mined all the coins and said, now, if you want some of these coins, you have to pay me for it. You have to buy it from me. It wouldn't be Bitcoin, and we wouldn't have Bitcoin. And so as Satoshi paid it forward, you too should pay it forward. And you too should give what you can of Bitcoin, which is the little bit Bitcoin, to those who otherwise can't participate in it. And, I'm going to write something about that in the right way, in the right place and time. But that's the essence of the idea. It's we are all recipients of a tremendous gift, and we are all now given the opportunity to be generous gift givers as well. Well, not all of us, but those of us who are in that position are in the same position. And I think if you actually reflect on it, the only path to Bitcoin, hyper-Bitcoinization, is if all those people in the world who aren't in a position to buy Bitcoin because they don't have money are given some. And the only way to be given some is to be gifted, right? I mean, I think to the extent that Bitcoiners are prepared to employ people and pay them in Bitcoin, that's lovely. And that's absolutely a right way to do things as well. But there's more than just a couple of different ways to distribute Bitcoin to people. And one is just to give it to them as a gift. And I think that that's a very right idea. And it's very much in the following of the footsteps of Satoshi. I wrote a piece way back called "What is the Essence of Bitcoin?" And the thesis of it was, there's the law of the jungle, and in the jungle, you don't give anything in return. The plant takes the sunlight and doesn't give anything back to the sun in return. The animal that eats the plant and doesn't give anything in return. The predator that eats the animal that's the prey eats it and doesn't give anything in return. And then there's the law of man, where we say we should trade with each other. We shouldn't take by force. We should trade with each other. And that's what money allows us to do. But it's a human law and it can be broken, because the law of the jungle is the metaphysical law and the human law is this moral law. But Bitcoin fixes some of this. Bitcoin says it doesn't just say thou shalt not steal, it says thou cannot steal. Bitcoin, at least. Thou cannot take it by force. I point out that there's a third, there's taking and there's trading. But I point out it, even in that article, and this is kind of another interesting surrender to prophecy. I point out in that article, there's also a third mode, which I'm not going to get into in this article, but I will write about sometime later. And I haven't written about it later yet. But there is gifting. Gifting is giving. It's not taking. It's not trading. It's giving without expecting anything in return. And I point out in there, Satoshi gave the world a gift of Bitcoin. And I said I was going to write more about it, but I didn't know what to write about it, I think, until now. So it's just very interesting for me to see what message from the universe I'm tuned into, that when I do surrender and let myself write freely, these pieces all start to come together over the long term, and some really extraordinary things come to me, at least in my interpretation of them. Like if you had spoken to the Tomer of 4 years ago, even, or 10 years ago, and talked about money not being a priority, ego satisfaction not being a priority, gifting being a priority, he would have laughed at you. He wouldn't have understood you. This being me, right? In the past, I was not connected to the enormous potential of those things. I was all about me.
So let's look a little bit closer on this with the unconditional generosity and giving from a place of abundance versus saving for ourselves. And this is not so much a financial position from my experience. This is more of a consciousness level. And if we are in a lower consciousness, we are more considering ourselves a victim of circumstances. So we feel that the world is sort of against us. So we need to save, we need to think about ourselves first, and we cannot just give away money. It doesn't make sense in that consciousness. But as we raise our consciousness, as we clean up our traumas and fears, we come into a place where it feels like you said before, I will give to Bitcoin and Bitcoin will give to me. That's a high consciousness position rather than a financial position. It's like it comes from your inner truth or inner knowledge, or from spiritual experiences, that you would even have such idea to just create unconditionally without expecting anything in return, and still believe that you will get a reward, you will be safe, you will. So that's like open source software is sort of the similar thing, where it's like together we are stronger. And why would I hide my code and sort of trying to create a wealth for myself? But actually open source software is a higher consciousness flow or action, because you trust that actually if you give this, you will be rewarded. So it comes from a similar level of consciousness. And basically, if you just look how you feel inside, if you feel afraid, if you feel financial panic, or you're afraid of money, or you raise your consciousness and you feel really truly inside that everything is going to be okay. So from that point of view, if you give It's just sort of contributing to the life flow of receiving and giving, receiving and giving. It can be articles, films, it can be music, or it can be pure Satoshis. But it's coming from that higher consciousness of abundance. And then it's different levels. In the beginning, we feel a little bit abundance. We are still a little bit afraid. But then as we move on, the abundance is just sort of growing, and we feel even more safe and taken care of by the universe.
Yeah. I think there's something, just listening to you say this, there's something in this that connects to the concept of proof of work, which is doing good work changes the universe. It leaves an imprint. You've rearranged some aspect of the universe. You've consumed some energy to create something that stands there. If it's good work, it's built to, especially if it's built to last and people find it valuable, you've created a surplus of value through your work in the universe. Right? Like whatever energy Satoshi put into creating Bitcoin created an overabundance of value. And it doesn't have to just be financial value I'm talking about here. I'm just talking about like the value that it brings of freedom and spiritual awakening and independence, thoughtfulness, and all these things. It creates this abundance of value. And that's what I said in the legendary treasure is what his coins represent. They're a monument to all these things, and they're an indestructible monument to these things. In fact, what makes them indestructible is all the energy that humans put into confirming the blockchain and making those coins of his permanent and unspendable and unretractable. And so when you put work into the universe, you enrich it. And I mean, this goes right back to the biblical story of creation, where God worked to create the heavens and the earth and light and separate light from darkness. And he saw that his work was good. And that's what the book of Genesis says, that after he created each and every one of these things on each of these separate days, he concludes the day by saying he saw that it was good. So we live in a universe in the Abrahamic biblical tradition, because a universe where even God works and judges his work to be good. And he didn't do it for money either. Like, he did it for the pure sake of goodness. And so there is this divine quality in the creation of Bitcoin, that it follows in the footsteps of the biblical Genesis story of doing work for the sake of it being good and judging it good, and then it being. And but it takes work. There's no deception. You can't deceive anybody about it. There's nobody to deceive about it. There's just pure, good, honest work. And I think that's also part of what makes Bitcoin such a spiritually powerful experience for people, because it is this recent creation in the universe that's done in this spirit of goodness and purity. And so it doesn't require a great deal of faith. You can verify everything in it using modern techniques of verification. And you can see that such a thing can exist in the world. And as soon as you see that such a thing can exist in the world, it allows you to break free of the cynicism that might have been the view that such things don't exist. And you can actually see that the whole universe itself is such a good thing. Obviously created, whatever creation story you believe with, the universe wasn't created to make money. That wasn't the purpose of it. It wasn't created for fame. It wasn't created for power. It is, period. It is. And it's good. And so there's just this deep metaphysical connection between work and goodness. And I think, and honesty. And I think that's where that expression, good, honest work, which is often sometimes called God's honest work, comes from.
Yeah, but it can be easily confused, this word work. So proof of work. Yeah. And the context that you put it in now, it's basically if you act from fear, that's not considered work, because then you're just surviving. And what you consider good deeds is when you act unconditionally without expecting anything in return. So conditional acts is not work in that sense, while unconditional acts is good work. And that leads to, yes?
Well, hearing you say that, and I'm not disputing that that's what I said, I'm a little hesitant. I think that there's obviously this higher state of work, if you can connect to it, in which it is unconditional, as you described. This is gift. This is the act of gifting, and it by necessity implies that any of the quality is a surplus to the universe, because you're not expecting payment in return, and you're not negotiating with the universe. Like, if I do this, you'll give me that in return. But I don't want to cast a negative judgment on the idea of trade, which is work for money, work for something conditional in return, because as far as I can tell, that's what distinguishes humans, for the most part, from animals, from the rest of the animal kingdom, where there isn't a lot of trade in the animal kingdom. I mean, you can see some species where there's a symbiosis, like between bees and flowers, pollinating insects and flowers. They each give to each other, and so there's a benefit there. But for the most part, it's animals taking, or it's living things taking from other living things. There's a circle of life, and there's a whole big thing. But that doesn't appear to be the manner in which they operate. They operate at kind of this level of force and war to survive and kill or be killed, right? Kill or die, which is a big part of nature. And mankind has trade. Like, I don't have to kill you. In fact, the things that you offer to me, you would never offer to me under the threat of force. We offer them in trade and exchange for each other. Sometimes we make gifts of our time to each other, and sometimes we trade our time for each other's money. So I don't want to condemn the existence of money and the use of money. I think in response to what you said, I just want to I want to make people aware of the fact that there's more than just dealing with money or dealing without money in an immoral way. There is a way to deal without money in a moral way, and that's to be generous and to give gifts. And the really wonderful things, and when you think about it, really, really wonderful things come from gifts, right? And those are the most creative things, because they don't have strings attached of reciprocity. And when you don't attach the strings of reciprocity, you're in a different space. You're in a different creative space. You're in a purely creative space, not creative for something in return, but creativity for its own sake. I think this is where real art comes from as well. And I have to put the adjective real in front of it, because people who make art with the anticipation of selling it. And so they're asking, well, what do my customers want? Or what's the business model behind it? How am I going to sell it? But that's trade. Again, I don't condemn it. I don't think it comes from the same place as where Bitcoin came to for Satoshi, or this article that we're talking about came to for me. I didn't sit down and write this article and say, how do I make a bunch of money? And Satoshi didn't sit down and say, how do I get rich creating a decentralized peer-to-peer network? It just came from this pure place of creativity.
And why can't everyone goes to this pure space of creativity? And this is sort of my question, that because if we're going into this new age, or I like to call it the Bitcoin consciousness, that's how people will operate. People will operate from a place of abundance and with unconditional, without expecting. And if you take these to attachments between partners or between a parent and a child, in the old consciousness where we still worked for money, then it's also you should do this, otherwise I don't love you, right? Whereas in the Bitcoin consciousness, it's like, you're free to be yourself and I will love you no matter what. So when we reach this Bitcoin consciousness as a species, we will not work for money in that sense. The money will not even exist as a motivation in that space. And so when you now defend, yeah, but trade is good, it's better than the animals. And I want to sort of push to say that maybe we are finished with that part of evolution, because it's also leading to war and all this kind of stuff, because it's like conditions, all the time conditions. So even though trade can be nice, but all of these attachments between people and countries, it's just leading to destruction. So maybe you're ready to go up.
Well, I think that it's interesting because I don't see that at the industrial level, say at like the production of energy level, the decision whether to make a power plant or an automobile factory or these things. I don't think those things will benefit from the elimination of money. I think those things will benefit the most from the existence of pure money. The price signal is a really, really important part of the decentralized nature of humanity, right? The price signal emerges from that. This many people are prepared to pay this much for this type of car. This many people are prepared to pay this much money for that type of food. The price mechanism, when allowed to be free in a free market, allows for decision making that's so much more optimal than chaos or central top-down control. That's the purpose of money, that it reduces all this tremendous chaos and complexity of 7 billion people in the world living their lives, each with their own values, each with their own world, being able to coordinate on the energies that they put to produce the things that help them live. So I think so I think money remains essential if we're going to be a species that makes things that are useful for us. And I don't want to say but, and having said that, we now also rise above only money directing our activities. We should have so much abundance that we don't have to spend all of our time working. And we should have, through pure money, so much of such an ability to use it that it isn't, that all the value isn't skimmed off the top as it constantly is by the governing and ruling class under a fiat system, that now we have all this time on our hands to do the beneficial, generous, gift-like, artistic things that have been held back from us because we first didn't have the technology, and then we didn't have the right money, and then yada, 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 like all these chain of obstacles that we can now surpass all these obstacles and have a very significant portion of our lives dedicated to generosity. We may get to a stage where we need very little money, or we need to put in very little energy into earning money to pay for the things that money can buy. And then we'll spend most of our time on the things that money can't buy, building friendships, connecting with other people, pursuing our own spiritual awakening or development, discovering what art is capable of creating. And I feel like we're on a ramp towards that now. And that I think Bitcoin is a big part of that. And the reason Bitcoin is a big part of that is because it is pure money. It's not tainted money. And so it allows money to serve the function that it can. And interestingly enough, I think ironically, the greatest thing that pure money will give us is it will give us access to pursue the things that money can't buy. And that is love and friendship and integrity and intelligence and all these great things that no amount of money can buy. But pure money can solve for all the other things that keep us from getting to these things that money can't buy. So
it's almost
like the gift.
Like if we look at it as the chakra system, then we have the lower chakras, like with the survival things. And so it's like Bitcoin can make sure that we keep those intact. Those those lower chakras with the greed and survival and all these things. And so they will just be sort of balanced. So the basic needs are taken care of. And we can trade and all these things. But then we are allowed to come into our higher chakras. And that's where the unconditional actions and projects will happen. So I can definitely see that it's not like a either or, but it will be like a combination of trade, but it will not be such a desperation behind the trade and about
it won't be.
accumulation.
Yeah, like I think right now under fiat, it's like 40 hours a week you spend at the office or at the job. You spend another, I don't know, 10 hours a week commuting to and from it. You spend all your time worrying about paying bills, like the money, earning money, spending money, having money take care of you is more than half of your waking life. And it's so, and it's distracting. And how much of your time do you spend loving and friending and learning, not learning to make money, but learning for the sake of pure knowledge? It's very small, you know, and I think this is what having pure money is going to make way for. It's like it'll expand the time that you can dedicate towards these other things and therefore not be so worried about money all the time. One thing about money is like, oh, it's hard to earn the necessities because taxes and inflation steal all the money that we make and force all these trade-offs and the quality of everything to continuously get worse. But the other thing about money is it distracts us and we start to pursue, we become fiat minded, we start to pursue all these things that money can buy at the expense of the values that require work on our part that money can't buy. So you want to get a yacht as an example, or then some Mercedes or BMW as some example, instead of pursuing spiritual enlightenment as an example. And when you put all that energy and all that effort into the work that it takes to get that material good, you're actually not, you're making a trade-off, right? You're selling what you could have had as a benefit if you had instead put that time and energy into learning a new philosophy or learning an art skill set that really truly gives you fulfillment in a way that sitting in a fancy car does not ever provide you with, and that you can't really build upon. So there's this internal work that we have to do, which isn't about money. And being aware of that is actually a form of freedom and enlightenment that money can't buy and that many people really miss out on. I know, like I'm speaking personally, right? Like I missed out on a very long period of time in my life where I thought the purpose of all of these things that I was learning was ultimately to make money. And now I realize, no, that was, at least you did many of these things and retained them as work that you can know so that you can apply them not just towards the purpose of making money, but towards higher purposes, higher personal purposes.
Yeah. It's almost like being an alcoholic to pursue these short term pleasures and superficial status symbols, because it all comes from unmet insecurities within us until we sort them out, until we look at ourselves and why are we doing this?
Yeah, and I really want to be careful not to come down hard on all material things or all values. Like there's a lot of things that people make and sell for money that are really, really good. And so they're not all really, really bad. Under a bad money system, many of those things are made worse all the time. And under a system where the leaders of the companies that provide those things are purely money focused, those things are made worse. Like how many companies are founded on good ideals and then they eventually grow and then some manager comes in and screws with them. There's so many histories of so many companies. I mean, one of the great stories is how Steve Jobs created Apple and was fired from Apple the company that he created, the vision that he created, and they put in a guy who had worked for Pepsi in his place, like just a fiat marketer of sugary water drinks. And Apple nearly died as a consequence of that. And it wasn't until the return of Steve Jobs that the company had its life re-injected in it and its creativity re-injected in it. I think that's a great story, but there's so many stories like that where the soul of the company withers under MBA management, and what you actually need is the management of someone who is bringing the idea to life. Well, that's pretty much all I wanted. Like, I think there's a lot to be said for organizations that still rely on money, but don't rely only on money, right? There is this beautiful relationship that can be had, which is through the price signal and people choosing to spend their money on great products rather than being forced to spend their money on shitty products. And all of this comes back down to freedom. If you get out of the way of manipulating things by force, which is the law of the jungle, and let human relationships of voluntary trade take place, what actually emerges from that is even higher than human trade, right? It's just human spirituality, these things that are appreciation and love and joy and integrity. And I can just list all these virtues probably all day, but you don't even need to list them to experience them. You don't have to know what integrity is to have integrity. And you don't have to know some definition of love, which poets themselves have been trying for centuries to describe. To experience love, you can experience it without knowing what the word means. And that comes from being in that space of generosity. Like, some aspect of love is it's clearly an act of generosity that is voluntarily reciprocated, but obviously not in exchange for money. You can't buy love. You can't go into a store and purchase it. You can't even go to another person and purchase their love for money.
I'm preparing a new course for November, and I call it Exit Fiat, because as long as we act to earn money, we act in fear. So we are feeling stuck in some situation. And how to then switch, how to exit fiat. And I see it as, like you describe it right in this article, and how you love being in the flow state and you feel rewarded, and that money worry sort of disappears. It's like for everyone to find that thing that they love to do, that thing that they love to give without feeling that they lose anything, without feeling that it's a burden. So if a person finds something to give to the world, that's then work. And then to find other people who actually wants to pay for it, then you do that and you improve that skill, or you improve how to communicate around that. And then you keep doing that while you're still having a fiat job because you need to pay your bills. But that's sort of an escape plan. It's that even though you can't like just quit your job and move into a cave and so on, but staying in society, but just, it's like creating a new personality, like doing what you love. And then, like you said, the price signal for that, is it possible for me to earn money doing what I love? And then slowly transition more and more into that.
Yeah. I think that, I think that's, I don't know how long this takes. And I guess there's individual journeys that can be faster and slower than what the arc of civilization takes. But I think that this is a mega trend that Bitcoin is the enabler of, right? Which is a whole societal journey towards enlightenment, because it ends the cancer of fiat and intervention and irrational intervention by egomaniacal politicians and bureaucrats who think that they can actually control all of humanity better than humanity left to its own devices really can.
Yeah.
I don't know if I said that well, but just another plug for freedom.
it is this transition that we can see in the Bitcoin community, where people are exploring their passions and then they figure out how to get paid for it. And that's the big difference, right? When you do something in the first priority because you love it and you get paid for it. So this has been like a theme running through this conversation, that if the first priority is to get paid, first of all, people don't want to buy the art, or they don't want to buy the music because they can hear it's sort of a greediness behind the music, or they can feel the frequency behind what you're doing. So when you start doing things because you love it, it has this freedom sense to it. And I think that's the way to go.
Yeah. So, maybe kind of like a wrapping up thought is there's a leap of faith into doing what you love. And you may have to take it a few times. And it takes a bit of courage to truly leap into it without money being the motivating force behind doing it. And you just let it go. And there is this discovery of your pure self in doing something without the expectation of reciprocity. So when you're giving a gift, you're the recipient. Right? You're giving the gift to yourself of freeing yourself from having to be reciprocated in monetary terms by somebody else. Right? You're expressing yourself as you purely are, and that's a really powerful and nice gift to give. It's a really valuable gift to give to yourself, and it's not an all or nothing thing, I guess, is what I would say to people. Set aside some of your time for yourself, gift it to yourself. Don't be a slave of having to be reciprocated, of everything you do having to be reciprocated in some way by someone else. It's just purely for your own sake. And that's how you discover the true you. And that's where you get the real feedback from of, was this a lovely experience, or was it a forced experience, or was it a painful experience? And that's how you discover who you truly are. And I don't think that there's any other way to do it. I mean, you may get so lucky that someone hires you to do a job that is completely aligned with your true self. But even then, there's the taint, because you're thinking, well, what do they want me to do? Not do I want. What do I want me to do? Potentially, if you're responsible. But there's a lot to explore there, right? I think everyone has to go on their own journey. Some people are going to be more self-reflective, rationally. Some people are going to be more just go with the flow. And some people will have their own complete way to do it. But if you want to experience this thing, you have to commit to yourself to experience this thing, and that's really all you have to do. It's like forming any kind of habit. Gift yourself some of your time.
It's been great talking to you, Tomer. And
you
of
as well,
course,
my friend.
If anyone have not read it yet, the link will be in the description, and you can read it again.
That's great. Guys, for people who don't like to read because they're listening to this podcast, Guy Swan has a recording of it on his podcast, Bitcoin Audible. I don't remember the exact episode number, but he does a really wonderful job reading it. And I'd say the first time I wrote it, I cried when the story came to me. I didn't cry about the story until I heard him reading it at the very end again. So that I really commend the quality of Guy's work.
Great. Yeah. So thank you for coming, and see you around.
Yeah. Thank you, Sam. All the best. Thanks for doing this podcast.